The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform one final time before entering the briefing room. She had been stationed in Afghanistan for 8 months, leading a specialized reconnaissance unit through some of the most dangerous terrain in the region. Her unit was known for their precision, their silence, and their ability to gather intelligence where others had failed. Sarah was not like most officers in the military. At 28, she had already earned a reputation that preceded her wherever she went. Her colleagues respected her tactical mind, but there was something else about her that made conversations stop when she walked into a room. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen things that would break most people, yet she remained steady, focused, and unshakable. The briefing room was filled with high-ranking officials from various branches of the military. Today was different from the usual mission updates. Word had spread through the base that a general from the Pentagon was visiting, someone important enough that even the base commander seemed nervous. Sarah had been specifically requested to attend this meeting, though she had no idea why. As she took her seat among the other officers, Sarah noticed the tension in the room. Conversations were hushed, and everyone seemed to be waiting for something significant to happen. She had learned to read these situations well during her time in the military. This was not just another routine briefing. General Robert Harrison entered the room with the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail around him. His uniform was pristine, decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke of decades of service and numerous commendations. As he walked to the front of the room, every person present stood at attention. The general began by discussing recent developments in the region, strategic priorities, and operational updates that required immediate attention. Sarah listened carefully, taking mental notes as she always did. However, she could sense that this was preliminary to something more important. The general's eyes occasionally moved across the room, and she had the distinct feeling that he was looking for someone specific. After about 20 minutes of general discussion, General Harrison paused and looked directly at Sarah. The room became noticeably quieter, and she felt every pair of eyes turning toward her. She maintained her composure, keeping her expression neutral and professional, but her heart rate increased slightly. In her experience, being singled out by a general could mean many different things, and not all of them were positive. "Captain Martinez," the general said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've been hearing quite a bit about your unit's recent operations. Your success rate is impressive, and the intelligence you've gathered has been invaluable to our overall mission here." Sarah stood up and responded with the appropriate military courtesy. "Thank you, sir. My team is dedicated to excellence in everything we do." The general nodded, but his expression remained serious. "I've also been hearing about something else, Captain. Something that has caught the attention of people much higher up the chain of command than myself." He paused, letting his words sink in. "There are stories circulating about your unit's call sign, about operations that have become something of a legend among the troops." The room was now completely silent. Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's attention, but she remained calm. She had expected that eventually someone would ask questions about the missions her unit had been conducting. They had been operating in areas where few others dared to go, and their success rate had indeed been exceptional. "Captain," General Harrison continued, "I need you to clarify something for me, and I need you to be completely honest. There have been reports of a reconnaissance unit operating under a very specific call sign, one that has become associated with some of the most successful and dangerous missions in this theater of operations." Sarah knew exactly what the general was referring to, but she waited for him to ask the specific question. In the military, it was always better to let superiors be explicit about what they wanted to know rather than volunteering information that might not be what they were looking for. The general took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Captain Martinez, I want you to state, clearly and for the record, What call sign your unit operates under during your reconnaissance missions? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the anticipation building in the room. Some of the officers present had clearly heard rumors about her unit's activities, while others seemed genuinely curious about what was about to be revealed. She took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would likely change how everyone in the room viewed her and her team. The military had always been a place where reputations were built on actions rather than words. Sarah's unit had earned their reputation through months of dangerous work, successful missions, and results that spoke for themselves. However, she also knew that sometimes reputations could become larger than the reality behind them, and she was not sure whether this moment would enhance or complicate her position. As she prepared to answer the general's question, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had always been drawn to challenges that others avoided. Her father had been a veteran, and she had grown up hearing stories about military service, duty, and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. When she enlisted, Sarah had not expected to find herself in a leadership position so quickly. However, her natural ability to remain calm under pressure, combined with her tactical intelligence and her ability to inspire confidence in others, had fast-tracked her through the ranks. By the time she was deployed to Afghanistan, she was already recognized as one of the most promising young officers in her unit. Her team had been assembled from volunteers, soldiers who were willing to take on missions that carried higher risks, but also higher potential rewards in terms of intelligence gathering. They had trained together for months before deployment, developing a level of coordination and trust that was essential for the type of work they would be doing. The missions themselves had been unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Operating deep in enemy territory, often for days at a time, required not just physical courage but also mental resilience and the ability to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for her entire team. Their first major success had come 3 months into their deployment. They had been tasked with gathering intelligence about enemy supply routes in a region that had been largely inaccessible to coalition forces. The mission required them to infiltrate an area where they would be significantly outnumbered and completely cut off from immediate support. Sarah remembered the moment when she realized that her unit was operating at a level that went beyond standard reconnaissance work. They were not just gathering information, they were operating in situations where their very presence could shift the balance of power in the region. The intelligence they provided was being used to plan major operations, and their success or failure could have far-reaching consequences. It was during that first major mission that her team had adopted the call sign that would eventually bring them to the attention of the highest levels of military command. The call sign had not been assigned to them officially. Rather, it had emerged naturally from the circumstances of their operations and the way they conducted themselves in the field. Now, standing in this briefing room with General Harrison waiting for her answer, Sarah understood that this moment would define not just how her current mission was perceived, but possibly her entire military career. The call sign that her unit used was not just a radio designation, it had become a symbol of something larger, something that had captured the imagination of soldiers throughout the theater of operations. She could see in the general's eyes that he already knew what her answer would be, but he needed to hear it officially, on the record, in front of witnesses. This was not just about satisfying curiosity. This was about acknowledging something that had already become a reality in the field. Sarah looked directly at General Harrison, her voice clear and steady. "Sir, my unit operates under the call sign Spectre 6. The effect was immediate and profound. The room, which had already been quiet, seemed to become even more silent, as if the very air had been sucked out of it. Several officers exchanged glances that spoke of recognition and something that might have been awe. Others leaned forward slightly as if trying to make sure they had heard correctly. General Harrison's expression remained controlled, but Sarah could see a flicker of something in his eyes. Whether it was surprise, respect, or concern, she could not be sure. The general had clearly known what her answer would be, but hearing it confirmed seemed to carry more weight than even he had expected. "Spectre 6, the general repeated slowly, as if testing how the words sounded when spoken aloud in an official setting. "Captain, are you aware of the reports that have been circulating about operations conducted under that call sign?" Sarah maintained her professional demeanor. "I am aware that our missions have been successful, sir, and that word of our activities has spread beyond our immediate unit." Colonel Williams, the base commander, shifted in his chair. Sarah noticed that he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. During her months at the base, he had always been professional and supportive, but now there was something different in his gaze. It was the look of someone who had just realized that a person they thought they knew was actually someone quite different. General Harrison continued, "Captain, the call sign Spectre 6 has been mentioned in intelligence reports from multiple sources. Enemy communications that we have intercepted refer to a reconnaissance unit that seems to appear and disappear without warning, gathering intelligence and conducting operations that have significantly disrupted enemy activities in this region." He paused, consulting a folder that he had been carrying. "According to these reports, Spectre 6 has been credited with providing intelligence that led to the successful neutralization of 3 major enemy supply routes, the identification of 2 high-value targets who were subsequently captured, and the prevention of at least 4 planned attacks against coalition forces." Sarah listened without changing her expression, though internally she felt a mixture of pride and concern. She was proud of what her team had accomplished, but she also understood that having their activities documented and discussed at this level meant that their operations would likely become subject to much greater scrutiny. "Furthermore," General Harrison continued, "there are reports from soldiers throughout this theater of operations about encounters with Spectre 6, stories about a reconnaissance unit that operates in areas where others cannot go, that appears when least expected, and that has never failed to complete a mission." Major Thompson, who was seated near the back of the room, spoke up. "General, if I may, I can confirm some of those reports. 3 weeks ago, my unit was pinned down in a firefight about 40 kilometers north of here. We had been cut off from support and were running low on ammunition. Out of nowhere, we started receiving precise intelligence about enemy positions that allowed us to break out of the situation." He looked directly at Sarah. "We never saw who was providing that intelligence, but the radio calls were coming from Spectre 6. When we tried to make contact to coordinate a joint operation, they had already disappeared. It was like they had never been there, except for the fact that the intelligence they provided saved the lives of every man in my unit." Other officers in the room began nodding, and Sarah realized that similar stories were circulating throughout the military community in Afghanistan. Her unit's operations had apparently made a much larger impact than she had realized. General Harrison closed the folder he had been reading from and looked at Sarah with increased intensity. "Captain, what I am about to tell you cannot leave this room. The call sign Spectre 6 has come to the attention of the Pentagon, and not just in routine operational reports. Your unit's activities have been noticed at the highest levels of military and civilian leadership." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Being noticed by Pentagon leadership could be either very good or very bad for a military career, and she was not yet sure which direction this conversation was heading. 3 days ago, the general continued, I received a direct communication from the Secretary of Defense. He wanted to know everything about the unit operating under the call sign Spectre 6. He wanted to know who you are, how your unit operates, and whether your methods could be replicated in other theaters of operation. The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah understood now why this meeting had been called, and why so many high-ranking officers were present. This was not just about acknowledging her unit's success. This was about determining whether their approach represented a new model for military operations. General Harrison walked closer to Sarah, lowering his voice slightly, but still speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Captain, I need to understand something. Your unit's success rate is unprecedented. In 8 months of operations, you have never failed to complete a mission, never lost a team member, and never been detected by enemy forces during an operation. That kind of performance does not happen by accident." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, my team is exceptional. We have trained extensively, we work well together, and we understand the importance of our mission. We also understand that failure is not an option when the lives of other soldiers depend on the intelligence we gather." "That's not sufficient explanation, Captain," General Harrison replied. "I have read detailed reports of your training, your background, and your team composition. While you are all highly skilled, nothing in those reports explains the level of performance you have achieved in the field." Colonel Williams leaned forward. "General, if I may add something, Captain Martinez's unit does operate differently from our standard reconnaissance teams. They volunteer for missions that other units would consider too dangerous. They spend longer periods in the field than is typically recommended, and they seem to have developed techniques that are not part of standard military doctrine." Sarah realized that she was being asked to explain not just what her unit did, but how they did it. This was delicate territory because some of their methods had indeed evolved beyond standard procedures. They had adapted to the unique challenges of their environment in ways that were effective, but that might not be easily understood or approved of by traditional military leadership. "Sir," Sarah said, "my team operates on the principle that conventional approaches often fail in unconventional situations. We have developed methods that allow us to remain undetected for extended periods, to gather intelligence that would be impossible to obtain through standard reconnaissance techniques, and to operate in areas where larger units would be immediately compromised." General Harrison studied her for a long moment. "Captain, I am going to be direct with you. There are some people in Washington who believe that your unit represents the future of military intelligence operations. They want to expand your methods and create additional units based on your model." He paused, and Sarah could sense that there was more to this statement than he had yet revealed. "However, there are also people who are concerned about a unit operating with the level of autonomy that yours appears to have. They worry about accountability, about operations that may be pushing the boundaries of what is considered acceptable, and about the precedent that your success might set for other units." Sarah understood the implications immediately. Success in the military could be a double-edged sword. While exceptional performance was rewarded, it could also lead to questions about how that performance was achieved and whether it came at costs that were not immediately apparent. The general continued, "I need to know, Captain, whether your methods could be taught to other soldiers, whether your approach could be scaled up to larger operations, and whether your unit's success is based on techniques that would be considered acceptable by military leadership and civilian oversight." This was the moment Sarah had been both hoping for and dreading since her unit had begun achieving exceptional results. She knew that their success would eventually attract attention, but she also knew that explaining their methods would be complicated. Some of what they did was indeed beyond standard procedures, not because they were doing anything wrong, but because they had found ways to be more effective than traditional approaches allowed. Sarah took a deep breath, understanding that her next words would determine not only her future, but potentially the future of unconventional military operations. "General, what my unit does differently is not about breaking rules or operating outside acceptable parameters. It's about adapting military excellence to circumstances that traditional approaches cannot handle effectively." She could see that everyone in the room was listening intently, waiting for her to explain what had made Spectre 6 legendary among the troops. "Sir, when we are inserted into hostile territory for reconnaissance missions, we operate under the assumption that we are completely on our own. We cannot rely on immediate extraction, rapid backup, or real-time communication with command. This forces us to be more thorough in our preparation, more innovative in our problem-solving, and more committed to mission success. General Harrison nodded, encouraging her to continue. My team spends weeks studying our target areas before deployment. We learn about local customs, terrain features, weather patterns, and enemy behavioral patterns in ways that go far beyond standard briefings. When we enter an operational area, we are not just soldiers gathering intelligence. We are becoming part of the environment in ways that make us nearly invisible. Major Thompson interjected, "Captain, that sounds like what Special Operations Forces do. How is your approach different?" Sarah had anticipated this question. "Sir, Special Operations Forces are designed for direct action, for engaging the enemy and accomplishing specific tactical objectives. Our unit is designed for pure intelligence gathering, which requires a completely different mindset. We avoid engagement whenever possible. Our success is measured not by what we destroy, but by what we learn and report back." General Harrison consulted his notes again. "Captain, I have reports here indicating that your unit has been in situations where you were outnumbered 50 to 1 or more, where you were deep in enemy territory for days at a time, and where detection would have meant certain capture or death. How do you manage that level of risk?" Sarah chose her words carefully, knowing that this was the heart of what made her unit different. "Sir, we manage risk by understanding it completely rather than trying to avoid it. When you accept that you are operating in an environment where everything can go wrong, you prepare for everything to go wrong. Our planning is not based on best-case scenarios, it's based on worst-case scenarios." She continued, "Every member of my team has multiple backup plans for every phase of every mission. We know exactly what to do if we are separated, if our primary extraction point is compromised, if our communications are cut, or if we encounter unexpected enemy forces. We train until these responses become automatic." Colonel Williams spoke up. "Captain, that level of preparation is impressive, but it still doesn't explain some of the intelligence you have gathered. Last month, your unit provided detailed information about enemy leadership meetings that were taking place in areas that our satellite intelligence indicated were impossible to access." Sarah realized that she was being asked to reveal the specific techniques that had made her unit so effective. This was sensitive territory because some of their methods were innovations that they had developed in the field, techniques that had not been officially tested or approved. "Sir, my team has developed approaches to intelligence gathering that take advantage of opportunities that traditional reconnaissance would overlook. We spend time learning how to move through terrain in ways that even local forces would not expect. We study enemy patterns until we can predict where they will be and when they will be there." General Harrison leaned forward. "Captain, I need you to be more specific. The Pentagon wants to understand exactly what Spectre 6 does that other units do not do." Sarah made a decision that would affect the rest of her career. "General, my unit practices what we call environmental integration. Instead of trying to move through enemy territory undetected, we become part of the environment in ways that make detection impossible." She could see puzzled expressions around the room, so she continued. "For example, when we need to observe an enemy position for an extended period, we do not set up an observation post at a distance and watch through scopes. Instead, we position ourselves within the area where the enemy operates, but in locations where our presence becomes part of the normal environment." Major Thompson looked confused. "Captain, that sounds extremely dangerous. How do you avoid being discovered?" "Sir, we avoid discovery by understanding that the enemy's attention is focused on threats that fit their expectations. They watch for soldiers approaching from expected directions, using expected methods, during expected time frames. We approach from directions they would not anticipate, using methods they would not recognize, during times when their guard is naturally lower. General Harrison was taking notes now, clearly trying to understand something that was outside his experience. "Captain, can you give me a specific example?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, knowing that she was about to reveal operational details that could affect future missions. 3 months ago, we were tasked with gathering intelligence about a high-value target who was meeting with local enemy leadership in a compound that was considered impossible to approach. Traditional surveillance would have required establishing an observation post several kilometers away, which would have provided limited information. She continued. Instead, we spent 2 weeks learning the patterns of local civilians who worked in and around that compound. We identified a group of workers who delivered supplies to the compound every few days. On the day of the meeting, we were positioned among those workers, close enough to hear conversations and observe details that would have been impossible to gather from a distance. The room was completely silent now. Sarah could see that what she was describing was beyond the experience of most of the officers present. The intelligence we gathered from that operation led to the capture of the high-value target and the disruption of a major enemy operation that would have resulted in significant casualties among coalition forces. General Harrison closed his notebook and looked directly at Sarah. "Captain, what you are describing represents a fundamental shift in how reconnaissance operations are conducted. The level of risk your team accepts, and apparently manages successfully, is far beyond what current doctrine would consider acceptable." Sarah understood the implications of his statement. "Sir, with respect, current doctrine was developed for conventional warfare against conventional enemies. The enemy we face here does not operate according to conventional patterns, so conventional responses are often ineffective." The general stood up, and everyone in the room immediately came to attention. "Captain Martinez, I am going to be direct with you about what happens next. Your unit's methods are going to be studied extensively by people who understand special operations better than I do. You are going to be asked to document everything you do, to train other units in your techniques, and to help develop new doctrine based on your experiences." He paused, and Sarah could sense that there was both opportunity and challenge in what he was about to say next. "However, you should also understand that your unit's level of operational autonomy is going to be scrutinized by people who are concerned about accountability and oversight. The fact that Spectre 6 has become legendary among the troops is both an asset and a potential problem." Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what the general meant. Success that attracted too much attention could lead to restrictions that would make future success impossible. General Harrison continued. "Captain, I want you to know that I have been in the military for 30 years, and I have never encountered a unit that has achieved what yours has accomplished. Whether that represents the future of military operations or an anomaly that cannot be replicated remains to be seen." He looked around the room at the assembled officers. "What I can tell you is that the call sign Spectre 6 is now known at the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Your unit's operations have been briefed to the President's National Security Team. That level of attention brings both opportunities and responsibilities that extend far beyond what any of you probably expected when you volunteered for reconnaissance duty." Sarah realized that her military career had just taken a turn that she had never anticipated. The unit she had built and trained to gather intelligence in Afghanistan had somehow become something larger, something that might influence how the entire military conducted operations. As the meeting concluded and officers began filing out of the room, General Harrison approached Sarah privately. "Captain, between you and me, what your unit has accomplished is remarkable. But you should be aware that there are people in Washington who are concerned about soldiers operating with the level of independence that your success seems to require." Sarah understood the warning behind his words. Military excellence was always valued, but military independence could be seen as a threat to the chain of command and organizational control that kept the military functioning effectively. "Sir," Sarah replied, "my team has never operated outside the boundaries of our mission objectives or military law. We have simply found ways to be more effective within those boundaries than traditional methods allow. General Harrison smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. Captain, I believe that is exactly what makes some people nervous. When soldiers become too good at what they do, it sometimes raises questions about whether they are still soldiers or whether they have become something else entirely. As Sarah left the briefing room, she understood that the call sign Spectre 6 had just become both her unit's greatest achievement and their greatest challenge. The attention they had earned through their success would now determine whether their methods would influence the future of military operations, or whether they would be restricted back to conventional approaches. The legend of Spectre 6 had begun in the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan, but its ultimate impact would be determined in the offices and meeting rooms of Washington, D.C. Sarah realized that the most important mission of her military career was just beginning.